Take questions 1 and 2 together. And with your permission, Mr. Speaker, may I wish you and the whole House a safe and happy Christmas on this, the last scheduled day of the session. The Government is committed to protecting and promoting the combined strengths of our Union, building on 300 years of partnership. It's vital that we continue to work across the UK on common challenges that we all face together, such as our recovery from COVID-19 and focusing on issues such as protecting jobs and supporting the NHS.
Thank you, and I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. And perhaps, Mr. Speaker, he will agree with me that there can be no better example of the strength of our union, of all 4 nations of the awesome foursome working together, than the successful funding and deployment and rollout, creation of COVID-19 vaccines, keeping communities safe across all 4 nations.
Well, my honourable friend makes an absolutely vital point. Across all 4 nations of the United Kingdom, people are being vaccinated thanks to the energetic efforts of the Vaccine Task Force, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and of course our superb NHS. And it's a source of particular pleasure to me that Scotland is enjoying that vaccine thanks to the efforts of the UK Government, proof that our NHS means that we're stronger together.
Let's head up to Scotland with Douglas Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today a poll revealed that 58% of Scots would vote for independence, and this is the 17th consecutive poll to show a positive result, and we're seeing rises in support for independence across all age groups. You know, the Cabinet Office can hoist as many union flags as it wants, but what part of "we're leaving" doesn't the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster understand?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question. And of course, surveys of opinion are always fascinating. But the figures that I'm interested in are the figures that show that the UK Government is spending more per capita in Scotland than it is in other parts of the United Kingdom, and also the figures that show that thousands of Scots are now being vaccinated thanks to the efforts of the UK Government. If you look at a map across the world and you see which countries are having their citizens vaccinated, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England ahead of the pack, stronger together.
Can we have SNP spokesperson Pete Sharp?
You most certainly can, Mr. Speaker, and thank you. I listened very carefully to the right honourable gentleman's answer. And yes, we're grateful for the vaccine, but I didn't hear a response as to why he thinks Scottish independence has now become the settled will of the Scottish people. It's not like him. The right honourable gentleman is usually quick to give his views about certain things. So why does he think that Scottish independence is now at sustained majority support, reaching the highs of 58%, and is now the settled will of the Scottish people? Why is that the case?
Hear, hear.
Well, it's great to have the honourable gentleman here live and unplugged, rather than having to rely on a distant video screen, because his performance is always one that we savour. But sadly, I fear that his reliance on opinion polls is no substitute for his aversion to hard arguments. Why won't he engage with the facts? The facts show that in Scotland, per capita spending, including on our shared NHS, is greater as a result of the broad shoulders of the UK Treasury. And as I pointed out earlier, and as he declined to acknowledge, folk in Scotland are being vaccinated now thanks to the efforts of the UK Government in a world-leading programme. I hope, in a spirit of Christmas, that he would acknowledge that this is a time for giving, and I hope that he will give just once the benefit of the doubt to the UK Government.
Pete Sharp.
I'm likely to be the ghost of Christmas future because it's not going his way. Let me try to give him a few reasons, see if he agrees with any of these. The disastrous Brexit Scotland didn't vote for. The attacks on our democracy. The undermining of our Parliament. The Prime Minister. Him. Maybe there's some sort of reasons as to why we are now in the lead. But the main one, and see if he agrees with this, is that the way that he arrogantly, Trumpian, says no to a majority in a democracy. Now, does he think constantly saying no to a majority in Scotland is going to drive support for independence down, or is it going to only further drive support for independence up?
Hear, hear.
Well, the Scottish Parliament is enjoying more powers now as a result of our departure from the European Union. Those powers allow the devolved legislature to have its own agriculture and its own environment policy, to supplement the leadership that, of course, it's been showing in other areas. Now, of course, as we move towards elections, which are coming this year, many people will focus on the record of the Scottish Government. And of course, there are admirable ministers in the Scottish Government, but people will be asking, Why is it that it's the UK government that's responsible for vaccinating people in Scotland, and yet the Scottish government is responsible for a decline in educational achievement in Scotland's schools and a growing divide between the well-off and the less well-off? Social justice matters, and that's why in the forthcoming Scottish parliamentary elections, the Scottish Conservatives will be making gains at his expense.
Jenna Davison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 5, please.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll take questions 5, 6 and 7 together, if that's okay. Because they're such good questions. They really are superb questions, and it's only right that they be taken together, in a oneer, in a group, as a collective. Intensive talks are ongoing, with both negotiating teams working day and night to reach a deal. We're going the extra mile in continuing the negotiations to see whether an agreement can be reached, and we will, of course, continue to keep Parliament informed on our progress.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his slightly delayed answer. My right honourable friend showed last week how successful the UK government can be in negotiating with the EU through its successful agreement in the Joint Committee. Will he therefore confirm that whilst he's shown the UK can do a deal with the EU, the government will only conclude a deal on a free trade agreement that's in the best interest of our country, and that the government will be willing to walk away if it has no other choice?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and even if sometimes results are coming later than we might have wanted, I know that we will be doing everything in order to secure a good free trade agreement in the interests of the whole United Kingdom. But the electors of Bishop Auckland, whom she represents so brilliantly, were clear when they voted to leave the European Union that we need to do so by December the 31st, and we will.
Let's head down to Cornwall with Cheryl Murray. Cheryl Murray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would my honourable friend agree with me that the opposition's apparent position of agreeing a deal no matter what is a ridiculous position to take during any negotiation?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The opposition party has taken a number of different positions on Brexit over the course of the last few months, weeks, perhaps even days. But one of the things that has never been clear is where exactly its red lines are. Ours are clear. We will always stand up for the United Kingdom. And may I also pay tribute to my honourable friend for the magnificent way in which he stood up for our coastal communities and our fishing sector outside the common fisheries policy. They will prosper thanks to her.
Sally-Ann Hart.
Mr. Speaker, fishing is reportedly a sticking point in the negotiations. My fishermen in Hastings and Rye need to have faith that this government, this Conservative government, will not sacrifice them again as previous governments have for free trade with the EU. Can I be confident in reassuring them that this government will provide the basis for such trust to be restored and built upon?
Yes, my honourable friend does an excellent job in standing up for her constituents in Hastings and Rye. And of course, the fishermen whom she represents so effectively know that we, as an independent coastal state, will be in control of our waters at the end of the transition period. Of course, we want to make sure that we manage shared stocks in an appropriate way with all of our neighbours, including those outside the European Union. But as an independent coastal state, we're in control.
So I'd like to Mr. Hilary.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. We all wish the negotiators well at this final stage as they demonstrate that sharing sovereignty, gaining benefits by accepting obligations, is what will be required in order to reach the agreement the government says it wants, we all want. Could the right honourable gentleman tell the House whether the legislation that will be required to give effect to any agreement will need to pass all of its stages in Parliament by the 31st of December this year, in order to provide clarity to individual businesses about what they can do from the 1st of January next year, which is, after all, only 15 days away?
Well, the right honourable gentleman reminds us all of the importance of seeking to conclude these negotiations as quickly as possible. If it is the case that the negotiations are concluded satisfactorily, then we will request that the House returns in order to make sure that we can legislate effectively, and we believe that we can pass the necessary legislation before December the 31st to give businesses legal certainty for the future.
Shadow Minister Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Put it in Gaspont 4. 20 minutes and Bob's your uncle. That was how the Prime Minister described his oven-ready deal last November, and the Minister's nodding. And clearly the government have delivered half of it, leaving the European Union. But we've now passed 6 of the Prime Minister's deadlines for the other half. the agreement on our new relationship with the European Union. Now, in those same comments last November, the Prime Minister also promised to end dither and delay. This week we've heard of companies that have stopped exporting to the EU because of the uncertainty created by the government's handling of these negotiations. So, has the Chancellor made an assessment of how many jobs have been lost through their incompetence?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for reminding us that the Prime Minister not only secured just over a year ago a handsome election victory, but he did so on the basis of having secured a withdrawal agreement which passed this House, which meant that we left the European Union on January the 31st. Part of that withdrawal agreement, of course, was a protocol on Northern Ireland. Some doubted that we would be able to reach a satisfactory conclusion. We did. There are others who doubt that we will be able to have a satisfactory cause for celebration at the end of this year when the transition period ends. I would invite him to wait and see on that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we are all waiting to see. But let me ask the Minister on a different part of the negotiations. When I've asked him previously, he has been unable to confirm that we will have access to the real-time information systems we need to identify foreign criminals at our borders. And we both understand why the government's position has prevented him from giving that confirmation. But this morning, speaking on Radio 4, just over an hour ago, the Home Secretary was pressed on the issue, and she said, and I quote, "All the types of channels we have used in the past, we will continue to use going forward." Was she right? And can I just say that anything less, Mr. Speaker, than an unequivocal endorsement will indicate that she wasn't?
The Home Secretary is always right.
Liz Twist.
Question 11, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government is committed to ensuring that elections are accessible for all those eligible to vote and has been working with the Royal National Institute of Blind People to improve the voting process for blind and partially sighted people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister tell us what step she has taken to introduce the recommendations made in the RNIB's most recent report, which finds that only 1 in 10 blind voters and less than half of partially sighted voters could vote independently and in secret in the 2019 general election?
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for raising this important issue and the work that she has done on improving the situation. We have been working intensively with the RNIB. Any systems and reforms that are brought in do need to be tested, and one of the unfortunate things about the cancellation of the elections this year has meant that we haven't had that opportunity, but we will do next year. And we are determined that whether someone wants to vote in person or via post, that they have a method of doing that that meets their needs and is secure.
We now have a substantive question to Minister Gove from Christine Jardine. Minister Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will take questions 12, 13, 15 and 16 together. The Government's been clear the transition period will end on the 31st of December, and we've made extensive preparations for a wide range of outcomes, and that includes a package of support for border infrastructure, the customs intermediary sector, and of course phased implementation of border controls. A trader support service is also in place to help businesses trading under the Northern Ireland Protocol, and we're also scaling up the provision of government helplines.
Right, we've audio only as we go up to Christine Jardine in Scotland. Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There has been a great deal of concern expressed to me by local businesses in Edinburgh West and by national concerns in industries like the whisky sector about difficulties they're having with things like not knowing how they should label products, with there as yet being no clarity about our future relationship with the European Union. So anything that the government can do to extend the period of adjustment would be appreciated by them and would help, I believe, in offsetting the drive by the SNP towards breaking up the United Kingdom, which I know the government shares my concern about.
Well, I'm thank the Honourable Lady very much for her question. She's absolutely right. We need to do everything we can to support businesses in Scotland and elsewhere. And I know that my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for International Trade, is doing everything that she can in order to help the whisky sector, not least through discussions with the US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. More broadly, in the free trade agreement that we seek, we want to make sure that there can be a smooth glide path for businesses in Scotland and elsewhere. And I look forward to continuing to work with her. She's been a consistent voice for Scotland's businesses, both in this House and before she came to the Commons. And her advocacy, free of any partisan agenda, is something of which her constituents should be proud.
Dr. Rupaha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is forever the smooth talker, as we saw in her answer to my friend from the front bench. But how exactly will our police access those real-time Schengen most wanted criminal databases in 14 days' time? And with 15,000 UK extradition requests in both directions last year alone, under the European arrest warrant, how can he guarantee that when we leave, Britain doesn't become a safe haven for murderers, rapists, terrorists, and other cross-border criminals? Because, you know, people want precision with prosperity, with security, and his one-liners, frankly, aren't good enough, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I try not to weary the House with overlong answers, but on the substantive point that she raises, it is the case that we have extensive security and law enforcement and justice cooperation with our friends in the European Union and indeed beyond, and we will make use of all the instruments necessary in order to keep people safe.
We now come with 1415 withdrawn to Chris Elmore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor of Lancaster will know that last week my Ogmore constituents received a hammer blow with the news that INEOS have decided to pull out of building their 4x4s, which had been promised by the ardent Brexiteer, Jim Ratcliffe. The fact that INEOS's owner was such a vocal supporter of Brexit and then has now fled to France to build his 4x4 has not been lost on the irony has not been lost on any of my hard-working and highly skilled constituents. So what assurances can the Minister give me that he is working to try and bring about more support for job growth that is highly skilled in manufacturing and that can work for the people of South Wales?
The Honourable Gentleman makes a very important point, and it is the case that in South Wales there's a concentration of skilled workers in advanced manufacturing who are the pride of the world. It is the case, of course, that General Dynamics in Merthyr Tydfil, near to his constituency, are receiving support and investment from the defence industrial strategy, but I look forward to working with him and indeed with the Welsh Government in order to ensure that his constituents can prosper in the future. It's absolutely vital that we work together in order to make sure that the skilled workers of the valleys have a bright future which they deserve.
Substantive question to Minister Gove, number 17. Minister Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is the case that I have regular contact with ministers and devolved administrations in order to ensure that we can work effectively together in our negotiations with the EU, the last of which was on the 3rd of December when the JMC EU negotiations met.
Right, let's to Scotland with John Lamont. John Lamont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite their warm words about being pro-trade, the SNP have consistently voted against or abstained trade deals coming before this House. So does the Minister agree with me that international trade is essential for supporting jobs across Scotland, and that by failing to support these trade deals, the SNP are letting down workers across Scotland?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, as has been pointed out by the Minister of Trade at this dispatch box on a number of occasions. And as he's reminded us, the SNP have never found a trade deal that they could vote for or like at any point. And of course, it's also the case that they want to erect barriers between Scotland and its biggest trading partner, the rest of the United Kingdom. Trade brings prosperity. The SNP are not in favour of trade and therefore not in favour of Scotland's prosperity.
We now have a substantive question to Minister Milling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I would like to take questions 18 and 20 together. It's just over a year since the general election, and this government is as committed to regional equality and creating economic opportunity as we were last December. In the face of COVID-19, this government has taken unprecedented fiscal action to support all regions and nations of the UK through the crisis, working to ensure that we protect jobs and businesses, minimise damage to the economy and deliver the right support as needed.
Let's head up to Yorkshire with Craig Whittaker. Craig Whittaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Calder Valley has over 19% of its workforce in the manufacturing sector and a further 26% in the financial sector. And both sectors have been hard hit by the pandemic. But can my right honourable friend say what steps the government have taken to boost employment in the Calder Valley and West Yorkshire, particularly as we emerge from the shadow of the pandemic?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his question and the importance of employment in the Calder Valley. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure he'll also be pleased to learn that the Conservative Party will be personally boosting employment in West Yorkshire when we open our new headquarters in Leeds next year. But more broadly, the government has announced unprecedented support across the whole of Britain to help unemployed people find a job, including the £2 billion Kickstart scheme for young people, the £2.9 billion Restart programme to help those unemployed for over a year, and we're doubling the number of work coaches.
19 withdrawn, straight to Robert Logan.
Speaker, the High Peak has a COVID case rate lower than the national average, yet is in Tier 3. And this is having a very severe effect on our local hospitality industry, which is so central to our economy. Can the Minister assure me that she's working with colleagues across government to provide all necessary support to those businesses and to work to get High Peak out of Tier 3 as fast as possible?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his question, and I know he's a very strong voice for his constituents in High Peak. Tier 3 restrictions were introduced based on sage evidence of what was absolutely required to bring the R rate below 1 in a targeted way, thereby bringing the transmission under control and reducing pressures on the NHS. Local authorities under Tier 3 measures, such as those in High Peak, also receive additional funding for local public health initiatives to help contain the spread of the virus and pave the way for local restrictions to be eased.
So we head to Minister Lopez with the substantive question. Minister Lopez. Mute button, Minister.
Forgive me, I thought I'd done that correctly. With your permission, I'm going to croak through questions 21, 22 and 23 together. Working effectively with the private sector, including external consultants, has undoubtedly helped us address some of the huge challenges the pandemic served up, but contracting authorities must extract value for money for taxpayers when working in this way. The outsourcing playbook, updated in June, includes 11 key policies to improve the quality of contracts we place with industry. We're also building internal civil service capability to reduce our reliance on external consultants.
Let's head to East Anglia with Clive Lewis. Clive Lewis. Clive, this is the best contribution. Press the button. I have to come back to him. Right, we'll try going up to Manchester with Andrew Gwynn. We'll try and come back to you, Clive. We'll go to Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The National Audit Office's investigation into government procurement during the pandemic reflects the chaotic culture of outsourcing across government. Contracts have been awarded after work has begun, without competition and without any meaningful due diligence checks. How can the public have any trust in the government's response if the government isn't transparent with them?
Going over to Minister Lopez. Minister Lopez.
Thank you. I appreciate an honourable gentleman's question. The National Audit Office set out a number of recommendations which we'll be looking into, but the idea that we did not need to contract under emergency terms during a pandemic is inaccurate, and there were rules in place to allow us to do that. We have been slow to publish contracts because of some of the problems that we experienced, and I set out some of those problems in a Westminster Hall debate last week, but those contracts, we now have 100% of those contracts published on the relevant bodies.
We go over to Merseyside with Margaret Greenwood. Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Good Law Project estimates that £1.6 billion worth of contracts for COVID-19 services have yet to be published, and details of contracts are consistently being published late. This is despite the fact that there's a legal requirement for those details to be published no more than 30 days after their award. The government is clearly failing in its duties. So what is the Minister going to do to improve transparency in government procurement?
Minister Lopez.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. As I say, we have now published in full all the PPE contracts. There are some difficulties in doing that, which I set out, as I say, last week in the Westminster Hall debate. But this week, we've also launched a green paper on public procurement, and we're going to be introducing a number of changes to our existing procurement regime when the transition period is over, which will improve the way that we do things in the future.
Ellen Hayes, Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister mentions the Green Paper on Procurement, which the Government published this week. The foreword to the Green Paper acknowledges the need to strengthen our long-standing and essential principles of transparency, ensuring value for money and fair treatment of suppliers. With serious concerns being raised about multiple contracts awarded by this government with no competition to companies with strong connections to the Tory party and no clear track record of delivery. Will the Minister put those warm words into action now and extend the Freedom of Information Act to all private companies like Serco delivering public services?
Minister Lopez.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I'm not sure what the implications would be of extending FOI in terms of commercial confidentiality, but I'm happy to look into that for her. And as I said, the Green Paper is there to reassure and to change some of the problems we've had during the pandemic, where we've either had a sort of full fat tender which takes far too long in an emergency situation or a situation of direct award. But I'm happy to look into the suggestion she puts forward.
Right, let's head back and hope Alan Partridge doesn't get in the way of me hearing Clive Lewis. Clive Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. I can be heard at last. Given that this government has doled out £10.5 billion of our money without any competition, according to the National Audit Office, frittered hundreds of millions on consultants and individuals whose main qualification seems to be they were friends with members of this government, does the Minister agree with me that in any other part of this world, this will be called corruption, plain and simple?
Right, let us head over to Minister Lopez. Minister Lopez.
I would not agree. It's very important to understand that actually every contract went through the same 8-stage process where it was looked into, and it was done on grounds of commercial sense rather than of anything to do with any connections. And as the NAO report said, ministers declared all interest and there was no evidence of any wrongdoing.
Kate Osborne, that's all we can.
25, please.
Minister Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will take questions 25 and 26 together. The UK Government is working with local returning officers, the Electoral Commission and public health bodies to identify and resolve challenges involved in delivering the elections next May.
Kate Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The May 2021 elections will see a record number of different elections with various different voting systems all taking place on the same day. In normal times, this would pose an immense logistical challenge without the added complications that we have brought about by the pandemic. So will the Minister outline why the Government have ruled out an all-postal ballot and refused to make any legislative changes to consider any new forms of voting, as we have seen across the globe?
The Honourable Lady for pointing out the extreme challenges that exist to ensure that the elections can take place in a COVID-secure environment. They are considerable, but they cannot compromise on the security and integrity of the ballot. And we feel that by moving to an all-postal system, that may be the case. We want people to be able to vote in person or by post, and we want them to do that in a COVID-secure way. And that is what we and our partners are working towards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know from my own experience that a large proportion of electoral staff and volunteers are made up from the demographic who would be considered vulnerable, with many retired and older people volunteering. If the government has refused to provide any more funding for the running of May 2021 elections, what steps are they taking to ensure that there isn't a huge shortage of electoral staff?
Well, one of the partners that we are working with are public health organisations and authorities, and he's absolutely right. We want to ensure that all, whether they're officers or whether they're volunteers, are safe. And we also anticipate, for example, we will have extra demands on postal votes and so forth, and we're determined to ensure that we have the supply to meet that demand. But the issues that he raises are at the forefront of our minds.
Shadow Minister Cutsman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my honourable friend for Jarrow set out the case of the scale of these elections very clearly in her question. And now with less than 5 months to go until these very major polls right across the United Kingdom, I hope the Minister might be able to respond to some questions that are on the minds of electoral administrators, campaigners and most importantly voters. Will voters be required to wear face coverings in polling stations, and if they are, will polling clerks be expected to enforce that, and what resources will they get to do that? If they're not required to wear face coverings, what protections will be put in place to protect staff in polling stations, and what steps is the government taking to ensure that we have adequate staffing of those polling stations? As my honourable friend for Stockport set out, and I don't think the Minister adequately answered his question, so many of our volunteers are from older demographics, and if the vaccine programme is not sufficiently rolled out, we do face a shortage of staff. Thank you.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for raising those issues. Hopefully we will be in a happier place because of the vaccination programme when the elections arrive. But she has raised some very important issues. Just as our retailers, just as other settings, healthcare settings and so forth, have put in place measures to make them COVID secure, whether they're public health related measures or whether they are about the enforcement that comes alongside and the policing of that. We will do the same at polling stations. We will do the same at counts, and also to ensure that the transparency that people want through scrutineers and so forth can still take place. We also will be introducing some slight legislative changes as well to enable, for example, somebody who has to isolate very close to the election to still be able to cast their vote. We're working through all of these issues with those organisations methodically, and we will have those elections. They will be safe and they will still have integrity.
Tom Randall.
28, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ministers and officials engage with the Electoral Commission on a regular basis about work to support effective and secure running of elections at a local and parliamentary level. We will continue to work with the Electoral Commission to ensure all elections that take place in the UK are both fair and free of any electoral or attempted electoral fraud.
John for her answer. In his judgment against the former Tower Hamlets Mayor Lutfer Rahman for electoral fraud, Richard Moore QC found that one council candidate had, in the space of 6 weeks, fought 2 wards in the same borough using 2 different names and 2 different false addresses. But that fact only came to light not through investigation by the authorities, but because local residents were able to inspect copies of the electoral register under supervision. And that right seems to have been thrown into doubt because of confusing guidance issued by the Electoral Commission. So could my honourable friend get in touch with the Chief Executive of the Electoral Commission to ensure that clear guidance is issued so that those members of the public looking into these measures don't find themselves prevented from accessing copies under supervision, and further cases they're looking into can come to light?
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important issue. Let me be crystal clear. The law is absolutely clear on this. Anyone can inspect copies of the current register under supervision. The register is a public document to enable concerned citizens, such as those my honourable friend refers to check that registers only include those who are properly eligible. And I will, of course, look into the matter that he has raised, because we do want clarity on this very important point.
Substantive question to Minister Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Independent Advisory Military Subcommittee first considers whether there are exceptional circumstances which merit a review. The criteria for historic recognition are the exposure of deployed personnel to a significant degree of risk to life and limb and to rigorous, arduous conditions in excess of what might be expected as part of normal service duties.
Go up to Scotland with Cyril Monaghan. Cyril Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is the only country which performed nuclear tests that has not formally recognised the contribution of its 20,000 nuclear test veterans. These elderly veterans, who were exposed to ionising radiation with no protection, have heard decades of rhetoric about their bravery, but without formal recognition, these are simply hollow words. Members on all sides know that these veterans deserve a campaign medal, but his department continues to refuse this modest request. Why does he consider that these veterans are unworthy of a medal?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid there are a number of inaccuracies in my honourable friend's question. It's not my department. We're not the only country in the world who has this view. Only this summer I met with the chairman of the veterans group concerned and asked Veterans UK, which is separate to the medallic recognition scheme, to revisit and redesign the support available to our nuclear test veterans. I understand the disappointment in this decision. It is not within my gift. My job is to make sure these people are looked after properly. I'm confident we're doing that. And again, I'm happy to meet campaign groups to see what more we can do.
We go over to Minister Lopez with a substantive question. Minister Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'll take questions 30 and 31 together. We want to make the administration of government much less Whitehall-centric and more reflective of the country as a whole. And the government's committed to an ambition to relocate 22,000 civil service roles out of the capital into the regions and nations of the UK by the end of this decade. Our Places for Growth programme envisages a series of hub locations with additional aligned offices within travelling distance of those hubs, and we hope this will deliver on our levelling up ambitions.
Midlands with Saki Bhatti. Saki Bhatti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the West Midlands is the perfect place to welcome government departments? And will she pay tribute to the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, who's been working with Cabinet Office Minister Lord Agnew to make sure that we can take advantage of the economic investment and employment opportunities that relocation would bring to the West Midlands?
Yes.
Thank my honourable friend for his question. He has a fantastic record of championing employment and investment in his region, from his time with the Birmingham Chamber of Commerce and to the launch this month of his business forum. It's great to see him working hand in glove with the West Midlands Mayor, Andy Street, and I'm very confident that when we're ready to make the announcements on Places for Growth, the West Midlands is going to be benefiting from this very exciting agenda.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that in order for government to be able to make the best decisions for local communities, civil servants and government departments should be based right across the whole country, including in Blackpool, as this will allow the government to truly represent the diverse nature of many of the communities across our United Kingdom? In that vein, will my right honourable friend meet with me to discuss the different opportunities that relocating government departments can bring to Blackpool?
Minister Lopez.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. He is a fantastic champion of Blackpool, and it's been great to see icons of civic pride like the Tower Ballroom secure culture funds thanks to his efforts. Wholeheartedly agree with him. The government must be better connected to the communities we serve, and that really is the thrust of the Places for Growth programme, and I'm happy to meet him if he wishes to set out how his city and town can help in that agenda.
32 withdrawn, so we go to Duncan Baker.
Question number 33, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Mercer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Office of Veterans Affairs has fundamentally changed this country's offer to our veterans, pulling together all functions of government to really understand the veterans' experience in this country. And briefly, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute to all of my colleagues who've supported us in that endeavour in this year, particularly this most difficult of years, where I'm confident that we have changed more than ever as we try and do our duty by those who've served.
Duncan Baker.
I thank my right honourable friend for what he is doing for veterans. Can I just ask, the service leavers since the 8th of January this year will have been given their veterans' ID cards to mark their time in the armed forces. Veterans who left before December 2018, will they still be able to apply for their card by the end of 2020? May you update the House for those veterans who are looking forward to getting their card?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. The Veterans ID card is an important policy that this government's brought forward. He's absolutely right that those who leave now will get an ID card. What we have struggled with is the verification of those who have served. The military, unfortunately, has been dealing on paper records for a number of years. That is changing with significant investments that we've funneled into people like Veterans UK. The ambition is to deliver this project once we have got to a place where we can prevent fraud and similar things, so that every veteran who has served gets their veteran's ID card and is recognised in the way that this Prime Minister would want.
Substantive question to Minister Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For centuries, the ability to trade freely, without barriers, across the United Kingdom has been the cornerstone of our shared prosperity, and the United Kingdom Internal Market Bill will help to maintain this integrated market to ensure the free flow of goods and services throughout the UK.
Let's head up to Scotland with Neil Gray. Neil Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Majority support for independence in the last 17 polls in a row, 58% this morning, in part due to the way Scotland has been treated by the Minister and his colleagues since the Brexit referendum. It's exemplified with the dictatorial internal market bill, which rips the devolution settlement apart and is now the subject of legal challenge. Why is the UK government unilaterally legislating without legislative consent with the Internal Markets Bill when the required common frameworks could have been negotiated with the devolved nations as they're still at the table?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question. As he knows, I'm a great admirer of him and also of his colleague Alec Neil. One of the things about the approach that we're taking is that common frameworks work alongside the Internal Market Bill, and indeed the House of Lords has confirmed that approach just this week.
Unfortunately, we're going to go to topicals, so we're going to start with topical one. Jonathan Edwards.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The House will know that last week I made a statement confirming that Vice President Maroš Šefčovič of the European Commission and I had reached agreement in principle on the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And as set out in my written ministerial statement issued yesterday, I'm pleased to say that Vice President Šefčovič and I shall be meeting again later today in a formal session of the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee, and I look forward to updating the House on the outcome of that meeting.
Jonathan.
Mr. Speaker, I was contacted late last night by a businessman in my constituency who's reliant on imports from the continent, and he can't find a haulage firm willing to carriage on his behalf due to the current delays at the ports. He's very concerned. Unless this issue is resolved, his business won't survive into the new year. What's his advice to my constituent?
Well, I know what a diligent constituency member the honourable gentleman is. If he gets in touch with my office, I'll be directly in touch with the business concerned.
We head down to St Austell and Newquay with Steve Double. Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The recent announcement from the Chancellor of a £220 million pilot scheme for the Shared Prosperity Fund is a very welcome step forward. However, there are some in Cornwall who are claiming that this is a sign that the government will break its commitment to match the amount of funding that places like Cornwall received through the EU. So can my right honourable friend confirm that the government is committed to replacing EU funding in full, which amounted to £1.5 million per year, and that, as the Prime Minister has stated, Cornwall will receive its share in a dedicated pot?
I can absolutely reassure my honourable friend that, as set out at the spending review, funding for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund will be increased so that it at least matches the EU receipts on average, which have reached around £1.5 billion a year. We'll be publishing a UK-wide framework in the spring, which will set out full details. And, of course, to help local areas prepare for the introduction of the SPF, we are providing the £220 million additional, which he referred to. And, of course, we'll be working closely with Cornwall to ensure that it gets the funding that it needs and for which he is such an effective advocate.
Shadow Minister Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK's ports are our gateway to the world. Yesterday, the Port Infrastructure Fund was finally announced. We found out that Dover didn't get the £33 million that they had asked for, but instead they got just £33,000. Portsmouth faces a shortfall of £8 million. Now, the Minister recently visited that port, so he knows its huge importance. So why has the government shortchanged vital infrastructure critical to the everyday economy, while at the same time wasting millions of pounds on consultants and middlemen as part of Tory cronyism?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises an important issue. The funding in the Port Infrastructure Fund was specifically available for projects which were due to be delivered by July of next year, when full import controls will be in place. It is the case that Dover was bidding for some infrastructure which would be complete by 2023, which is intended, of course, to take advantage of the new opportunities that control over our borders will bring, and we're working with Dover in order to ensure that a new approach towards juxtaposed controls can be in place. It's also the case that we're working with Portsmouth. Portsmouth Port is not unique, but is certainly singular in that it's owned by the local authority, who do a very good job, and we're working with MHCLG, DFT and others in order to ensure that not just the port, but also the broader infrastructure in Portsmouth and that part of Hampshire is sufficient for the needs of the port users.
Rachel Reeves.
I thank the Minister for that answer, but he needs to give greater assurances that there will not be those delays and disruptions that we all fear. The letter from the Parliamentary Secretary at the Cabinet Office to my honourable friend, the member for Portsmouth South, states, Ministers decided that all bids which are recommended to be supported will be funded to 66%. Not 100%, Mr Speaker, but just 66%. And what a false economy, given the cost to British businesses and consumers with delays and disruptions at the border. So will the government publish the full rationale for each of their 53 port decisions? Not least since some companies received next to nothing, while one port company, which coincidentally pays a former Tory cabinet minister £100,000 a year, was awarded £26 million yesterday by this government.
Of course, we'd be delighted to make sure that the full assessment criteria are shared with the Honourable Lady and with all constituency members. The Port Infrastructure team had an independent team to look at the eligibility of all of the ports that applied and to assess all of the bids, and they were done on the most rigorous of bases. But it is the case that a number of ports have welcomed the additional funding and the additional infrastructure support that we'll give, but we'll continue to work with all ports in order to ensure that we can have a world-class border, and the publication today of our future border plan for 2025 lays out the means by which we'll do so.
Thank
you very much, Mr Speaker. 2021 will bring significant opportunities for coastal communities such as Lowestoft to drive forward the COVID recovery in the energy, fishing, food and trade sectors. Can my right honourable friend outline the steps that he is taking to ensure that the promotion of investment in port, manufacturing and processing infrastructure is fully and properly coordinated between his and the other departments, including BEIS, DEFRA, the DFT and international trade?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very important point. Lowestoft is a hugely important port, and all the ports in Suffolk, and indeed those that serve the North Sea, are ports in which we wish to invest because, as he quite rightly points out, their potential, not just when it comes to increased access to our own fishing waters, but when it also comes to new investment in renewables, is growing all the time. Our border strategy, which we published today, has been published in consultation with other government departments, and he's absolutely right. We need to continue to work with them in order to take advantage of the opportunities of the future.
Let's head down to Swansea with Geraint Davies. Geraint Davies.
Happy Christmas, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we won't be in the single market or the customs union, but the deal on the table offers free trade without tariffs, minimum environmental and worker protection, and sovereignty to diverge for selective adjudicated tariffs if and only if we undercut EU standards. So why, on the last day of Parliament, is he continuing to threaten UK business with no deal, plunging them into immediate tariffs for no divergence in just 2 weeks' time?
Well, Borada, Mr Speaker, and indeed to the honourable gentleman. It is the case that the UK government has been clear about the importance of maintaining sovereignty, the right to diverge, and indeed full control over our waters. And we shan't be ambiguous about that, but we are determined, if we can, to reach a free trade agreement, and our negotiators are working hard to that end.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm sure you and colleagues across this chamber are even more aware that the world's finest ceramics are made in the potteries of Stoke-on-Trent, and the ceramics industry, both traditional and advanced ceramics, are integral to the UK's economy. So will my right honourable friend confirm that whether the outcome of the talks with the EU is either Canada or Australia, Stoke-on-Trent companies like Churchill, China and Steel Light will continue to remain world leaders in manufacturing and production?
not just the company that he mentions, but Royal Doulton, Wedgwood, Spode, and of course, more recently, Emma Bridgewater. These are names that are known across the globe, and they shine a light on the brilliant ceramics sector which is housed in Stoke-on-Trent and the potteries towns, and we will ensure in the future, as we leave the European Union, that across the world people have the chance to dine off and to drink from the first-class products made in his and his neighbours' constituencies.
Karen Buck. In which case, we'll go across to Dan Poulter. Dan Poulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the coalition government, great progress was made to improve government procurement practices. And there's still much more that can be done, particularly in the NHS, by taking advantage of national procurement where it doesn't currently exist. Given the scale of the debt that our country is now in following the COVID crisis, will the Secretary of State, my honourable friend, reassure me that the government is going to redouble its efforts to improve government procurement practices going forward?
My honourable friend makes a very important point. Can I take this opportunity, of course, briefly to thank him for the work that he's undertaken as Vice Chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on coronavirus, and of course the work he continues to do on the NHS front line. He's shown real leadership in the fight against this dreadful virus, and he's absolutely right. We do need to improve procurement. The Procurement Green Paper that was published earlier this week is part of that, but I hope to work with him and others on the front line to ensure that DHSC does even better in the future.
Let's head up to Scotland with Carol Monaghan. Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his previous response to me, the Minister talked about looking after the nuclear test veterans. Since they've not received compensation for their exposure to ionising radiation, this is frankly laughable. Is it not the case that the real reason these veterans have not received a medal is that this would be an admission by the UK government that they were placed in an extremely hazardous situation?
Mr. Speaker, that's not the real reason at all. This is a very clear process that's out with, and rightly out with, the control of ministers. There's an independent committee that looks at medallic recognition. They have looked at this again and come to the decision they have. I think it'd be worthwhile funneling energies into how we look after this special cohort of people. This decision does not diminish their service in any way. And again, I am happy to meet with both my honourable friend and chairman of the campaign groups to make sure we're doing all we can to look after those who've served.
Matt Vickers. Oh dear, it's not a good day. Dr. Rupert Huck. Definitely not a good day. Tom Randall, you're here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, Emma McClarkin, the Chief Executive of the British Beer and Pub Association, told the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Select Committee of the frustration in her industry at not being privy to data or being involved in the drafting of guidance relating to restrictions on hospitality. 70 million pints were lost in the first lockdown. As brewers and publicans try to understand changing and complex data, can my right honourable friend consider ways to involve the industry at the earliest stage and possible and share as much data as possible so that clear guidance can be issued and the industry can plan ahead?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all join you in lamenting the absence of the member for Ealing Central and Acton? I hope she's well, and look forward to... Well, yeah, but anyway, we're all rooting for her. But on the point made by my honourable friend... well, I do, actually. Matt's a great guy. You're absolutely right. I lament all of these absences, but I'm also even more grateful for the presence of my honourable friend, the member for Gedling, who's asked the second question in this session. And this is a very good one, because he's absolutely right. The increasing and welcome support for the spread of real ale has meant that necessarily, as pubs have closed and as they have moved towards takeaway, we have lost some of that production, and those in the hospitality sector have faced very difficult times. And he's absolutely right. We need to work more closely with the hospitality sector to understand the pressures that they face at this very, very difficult time. And I'm grateful to him for raising this issue.
T14 is withdrawn, so I'm going to go up to Derbyshire with Pauline Latham. Pauline Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Derbyshire is a fantastic place to live, to work. It has an all-round economy. It has great culture. So could I ask the Secretary of State what steps he's taking to increase the proportion of civil service jobs based outside in London and when they will be coming to Derbyshire?
Well, I can only agree with my honourable friend. Derbyshire is a great place to live. It rivals Lancashire in the many attractions which it has for people of good taste. And we will be announcing early in the new year steps which we are taking in order to move more jobs and more civil service responsibilities out of Whitehall and into locations such as Derbyshire, Lancashire and, of course, Teesside.
Right, let's head up to the northeast with Ian Lavery. Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Listen, Dominic Cummings, the man who single-handedly destroyed the nation's trust on COVID-19, was booted out of number 10 with a £40,000 pay increase. This is at a time when hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, have lost their livelihoods, and many, many more will follow. There's millions of other people are facing a real-term pay cut, a pay freeze. Does the Minister agree that this is totally and utterly immoral, in fact, obscene? And at a time of goodwill, Mr. Speaker, does the Minister recognise the good old British saying, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander?
Yeah.
Well, I'm very grateful for the point that the honourable gentleman makes. He's a brilliant campaigner, a doughty fighter. He's been at the front line of the trade union movement and at the heart of the Labour Party for many years. He puts his case very, very well. I respectfully disagree with him on the particular case that he mentions, but I do agree with him on the broader need for us all to recognise the significant sacrifice that working people across this country have been making during the COVID pandemic. And I want to thank him for the way in which he's fought for his constituents in order to ensure that our NHS is there for them. And I look forward to working with him outside the to and fro of this chamber, because I know what a great-hearted man he is.
Let's take Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Several businesses in my constituency of Kensington are major importers. I think, for instance, of Innocent Drinks, which is a very large importer of fruit juice. Clearly, these businesses do not want to have to pay tariffs. Will my right honourable friend assure me that no stone is being left unturned in trying to negotiate a free trade agreement with Europe?
Oh, well, my honourable friend makes a very, very important point. The constituency she represents is home to a variety of innovative businesses, many of which do trade successfully with Europe, and that is why we're doing everything we can to secure a free trade agreement. But of course, it can't come at any price. I'm grateful to her also for endorsing Innocent Drinks. At this time of year, I hope we will also all have the chance to indulge in some not-so-innocent drinks as well.
We now have the final question from Sarah Sultan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's plans to mimic the Republican Party's voter suppression tactics risk denying millions of people the right to vote. Hardest hit will be already marginalised groups such as the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities. In spite of being one of the most discriminated against groups in the country, neither the government's Equalities Impact Assessment or the Electoral Commission's evaluation of voter ID pilots make reference to Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities. So instead, at best, ignoring these communities and at worst, demonising them, will the government scrap plans to create further barriers for their democratic participation?
We now go to Minister Lopez. Minister Lopez.
Sorry, I do apologise. Yes, we're going to be continuing to work with charities and civil society organisations, including those that represent Traveller and Roma communities, to make sure voter ID is inclusive for all eligible voters. But we have absolutely no plans to scrap it. It's extremely important to protect the integrity of our democracy, and I fully support it.
Right, that completes the end. In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business, today for arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.